Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today. And in today's episode, we are going to be doing a listener finance review. This one is on the Cash Flow Rockefeller Prince, featuring the one and only, it's been a while, but we're glad he's back, Cube Crusher.
Yes, I'm here, still alive. Barely, but still alive.
Still alive. Cube Crusher, for those that don't know, made a pretty big geographical move to one of my favorite locations. I think it started off as a joke, and he's actually living out there now on the West Coast, Las Vegas.
Yeah, hot as shit.
Anyone who's a premium subscriber...
Premium!
By the way, we did a little bit of catching up before the show. We're going to put that out as the behind the scenes for you guys, so you can listen into our chat if you'd like. A little something extra for you guys that are premium. All right, so welcome to the podcast. We will be going through the profile here shortly. I usually have a few quick announcements at the beginning of the show. I really don't have that many announcements today. We did have a couple new premium subscribers that came on in the past few weeks, so we've made those announcements. Shout out to them. I did check earlier. We do not have any new countries listening, so nothing on that front. And really, without further ado, we're going to get into it. So the way that this started, I think a lot of folks had come over to the show relatively recently. I was on another podcast. Many of you know that, probably about a month or so ago. And that brought some additional and new listeners from that show to this one. And I've had a couple folks that have emailed the show and said that they've gone back through the archives and are kind of, just binge listening to the shows. And they came across some that I think at one point we had put something out and said, hey, if anybody wants to send in their numbers or send in their financials, like we'd be happy to, give you some, as a lot of you guys that wrote us talked about or put it, some non-advice advice, right? So if you wanted to share your numbers, that we would take a look at them and maybe do a podcast on them. And so that's what we're going to do today. So this show is going to be on Cash Flow Rockefeller Prince, who is one of our premium subscribers. I'm going to start off by reading the email that he sent into the show to give a little bit of background and context. And then I had sent this information over to Cube ahead of time as well. So we're going to kind of go through and talk about his situation and just give our feedback and opinions and have a little bit of fun with this. So before I get into this, I know I say this on almost every show, but I think it's really important to say this, especially on a show like this one for these listener finance reviews. In all seriousness, we do this for education and entertainment purposes only. We are not giving advice to the individual. We are not giving advice to any of the listeners. So take everything we say with a grain of salt. We're just two dudes on a podcast. Yes, I'm still in the industry and Cube was in the industry for a bit. And so, we know what we're talking about on the one hand, but on the other hand, we're just cutting up and having fun on the show. So don't take this as advice, as you guys have written in talking about non-advice advice. This is just non-advice advice, right? So consult your own professional, do your own due diligence, your own research, your own everything, and just look at us as two idiots on a show. But hopefully you will get some good nuggets out of this. The listeners will get some good nuggets out of this, and we'll have a little bit of fun. We'll have a couple laughs and kind of go from there. So that's my plan for today's show. And so without further ado, I'm going to start with this email, and then we'll bring Cube back in, and we'll start talking about the numbers. So this email starts off with, "Hi, Cash Flow King. So below are my stats. Not exactly too sure what information you need, but if you need me to clarify something or give more information, just let me know. To give you a backstory, I've been on a personal finance journey the last few years. Long story short, I never really cared about finances up until a few years ago. I just thought having all this debt was very normal and virtually had nothing in a 401k or savings. Long story short, I managed to date, and I just calculated this morning, paid off $75,000 of student loan debt, $28,000 of car debt, $24,000 in credit card debt, so a total of $127,000 in debt. Below is my salary, what I have managed to accumulate, and what I have remaining to pay off. So before we get into these numbers, I wanted to read that to set the stage, because it just so happens that this profile that we're going to go through and one of the other profiles that we're going to go through, these guys make very good, very high or relatively high incomes. And so some listeners might be listening to this and say, well, what the fuck, guys? You got to get realistic. Like, I don't make that much, or that's way above the median, or whatever the case might be. Everyone's always going to try to poke at something. But I think it's important to just know like where they came from, and just to extract as much as you can and try to benefit from the information. Don't get too hung up on too many of the numbers, because again, very, very healthy incomes as we'll talk about, but think about where they came from. And so I wanted to read that to you, and I'm glad that Cash Flow Rockefeller Prince shared this with us, because he did pay off quite a bit of debt. $127,000 of debt payoff is nothing to make light of. I mean, that's a lot of fucking debt that this guy paid off. So it's very impressive, but I wanted to make sure to read that as we get into some of these numbers, because I think it's easy for some people to get caught up on that and stay on that. But he also introduces a very interesting concept that we'll, I guess, touch on in the next part of his email before we get into the numbers. But anyway, so he starts to give his stats. He says, salary, I'm 37, single, salary of $200,000, get a 20% bonus, but not guaranteed. I also do something, and by the way, I went down a rabbit hole on this a little bit, and we might actually bring him on the show to talk about this, because he can probably do a way better job than we can. But he goes on to say, I also do something called overemployed. I had never before. Have you heard, Cube, have you heard of overemployed?
No, I hadn't heard it used that way. The only way I had heard it used was you had a job that basically you weren't qualified for.
Yeah, right. Okay. So did you go down the rabbit hole on this one or no?
I just briefly looked at it. I didn't get too much into it, because once I saw what it meant, I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't heard that word be used, but I had heard of people.
All right, we'll circle back to this. I've never heard of it before this email, so that kind of sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I did kind of briefly also look into it some. Okay, so I do also do something called overemployed the last few years to speed up debt payoff and asset accumulation. Here is a link to an article if you are interested. And the link he gave, I think it was a Business Insider article. I guess I'm not subscribed to them, so I wasn't able to read that, but I was able to find some information in other places. And then he says, excuse me, my salary goes higher than the 200, but I don't count it because it's never guaranteed. I have become a pro at landing and managing an overemployed career. Would be an interesting show topic. Okay, so before we get into his numbers, and we're probably not going to do this justice here, Cash Flow Rockefeller Prince, but we're going to try. For the listeners, Cube, overemployed. What did you find?
So basically what it was is during COVID, is obviously when all of this kind of started happening, everybody was having to work from home and couldn't go anywhere. So basically what some people did was they essentially took it upon themselves to get multiple jobs, because they could get two different jobs working from home, and one wouldn't know when exactly they were at work and not at work, and who they were working for, and what they were doing. That's basically my simple understanding of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially, job hacking, I guess you can call it, right? So I was looking at, and we might bring some of the shit on the show. I don't know. I go down the rabbit hole sometimes. YouTube used to be, I still love to watch YouTube videos and stuff, and I actually have a YouTube premium membership, and yes, I pay for that, and I think it's well worth it to not watch the ads, and that's a whole separate story. But one of the other things that I've been doing, especially since coming across this and some other things, I'll get on Reddit every now and then, and I looked up overemployed, and people talk about it like, I mean, there's this like community of people, just like there are for everything. Like, this is just normal to them. Like, people are like, oh yeah, help, I am completely overwhelmed with J3. I'm like, what the fuck is J? Oh, job 3, right? And they're like, J1 this and blah, blah, blah. And then here's what I did with J2. And I have one job that requires that I'm in the office 4 days a week, and the other one only requires me to be in the office 1 day a week. So I have to structure that perfectly so that of the 5 work days in the week, I'm in the office every single day, but yet I'm still working 2 jobs, and I don't have time for J3. And like, I'm like, holy shit, dude. Like, that's impressive,
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, it is. And I mean, some people are like, they're smart enough that essentially they can create bots or AI to almost do, quite a bit of their job for them at this point, depending on what they do with software and stuff.
Didn't we play poker with a guy one time that was talking about that? Like he was playing poker, but he was supposedly working because he had an AI bot at his computer.
I don't remember that.
I remember hearing about that. Yeah, I do. I remember hearing about that. I think it was at a poker table one time. Anyway, we may bring on, if he wants to come on, Cash Flow Rockefeller Prince to talk about this overemployed thing, because I think it's pretty fascinating, and I'm sure as the listeners are hearing this, if they're not familiar with it like we weren't, you're probably like, holy shit, and I'm not suggesting somebody do this or not do this. I don't know enough about it, but it's very interesting. So when people see, and I'm going to make an assumption here based on his email, but when people see and people hear that he's making $200,000, my guess is that is $200,000, plus the flexible bonus there that's not guaranteed, but that's likely the combination of those presumably two jobs.
Yeah, is
that how you read it?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's how I read it. That was his total salary from however many fucking jobs he worked.
Yeah. So before we get a bunch of hate mail to the show about like, oh, that's not realistic to have one person make $200,000 at one job. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it's not, but it seems like he's working multiple positions, at least two from what I gather here. So anyway, I thought that was really cool, and this just goes to show what appears to be a very strong work ethic for somebody that, as he mentioned, pretty much didn't give a shit about finances, and all of a sudden now was like, all right, I need to get my shit together, right? And so I think he's done a tremendous job of that, and we'll talk more about that as we get into some of these numbers. So first one is salary. We're going to call it $200,000. I think that's more than solid. I think most people would agree. Yes, it's going to vary depending on what area of the country you're in, but pretty much anywhere you live, I would say, with the exception of maybe like New York City and California and things like that, and you could probably still get by on $200K, but most parts of the country, that would be an above average or definitely a stronger income. Would you agree with that?
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's probably a higher, quite a bit higher than our average listener income, I would venture to guess.
And that's the thing. I'm actually kind of curious about that because we're starting to get more and more people write into the show. And maybe I'll throw a survey link out there coming up. Maybe we'll do an end of the year survey or something. Not that I want to get in people's business, but I am kind of curious because even the review he left us, which I don't know if you heard, by the way, he left us a 5-star review, which I thought was pretty awesome. But he mentioned something in there, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of no matter where you are in your personal finance journey, you'll get some nuggets out of this one. And I appreciated that because part of what I feel like we try to do with this show is have something for everybody, right? Somebody might be old or older or approaching retirement and doesn't give a shit about an HSA, but they want to hear that deep dive or that intro episode we did on Social Security. Or you have somebody else that doesn't give a shit about Social Security because they're 22 years old and they're worried about opening up their first Roth IRA. So how does that work, right? And so we try to have different pieces and nuggets in there for everybody, but you can't always be all things to all people. So I would be interested to see, we have a very small sample size so far of people that have actually written in with their numbers, but I would be interested to see, of the people that are listening to the show, where everybody is financially, because that might even help drive future episodes. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here as we go forward. So anyway, if anybody's listening to the show, if you don't want to send in your numbers, like you don't want us to do an episode like this on your situation, that's totally fine. You don't have to do that. But if you want to send in something real quick like, hey, I am 50, married, combined income is $300K, whatever, 2 kids, and retiring at traditional 65. It's just something super quick. We can almost try to start to compile, maybe not a database, but just get a sense of where people are coming from. Hey, single mom, 3 kids, make $25,000 a year, nowhere near some of the people on here, but we love the show, or I love the show. Like that would be fine too, whatever. So, because I don't really know where that stands, but I would agree. If I had to go out on a limb and guess, I'm going to say that's definitely on the higher end of income for people listening to the show. Let's get into it. Some numbers that he has listed here. And we don't have, excruciating detail on these. We just have that he has 5 different, and he does do the breakdown, but that's all we know. We don't know if these are private loans. We don't know if these are federal loans. We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. But for the debt portion, there are 5 different student loans listed at 5 different amounts. 2 of them happen to be the same amount, coincidentally. And the interest rates on these range from 5.41% up to 6.8%. And the total for all the student loans is right around $54,000 with a minimum payment of just under $400 a month. He goes on to say that he's planning on paying off the 6.8, which is the highest interest rate loan, here in the next few weeks. By the time this comes out, that might already be paid off. And then he's just going to be coasting, and we'll come back to this, but he says, I'm just going to be coasting for a little bit because I am sick and tired of paying $5,000 to $7,000 a month for the last 2 years on paying down student loans and other debt. We'll come back to that. What are your initial thoughts on the student loan stuff so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing too crazy. None of those rates are extremely high. Maybe the ones that are over 6%, is that a little bit high? Yeah, but, it looks like he's done a really good job of getting this paid down over how much was it exactly that he said? $75K he's paid off so far, which is pretty impressive. And I think overall he's doing a pretty good job here as far as getting this paid off.
Yeah.
That was kind of my initial thoughts. I personally don't like seeing over 6% on debt. That's kind of, realistically it's 1% above the risk-free rate right now. So is it the worst thing in the world? No. But psychologically, it may make him feel better if, that over 6% didn't exist, because he said, that he's been trying to pay it down a little bit quicker than what the minimum payment is.
Yeah. So I think we said this, but we'll say it again because it's worth mentioning. First of all, Cash Flow Rockefeller Prince, we think that you've done an awesome job up until this point. I don't know. It's very hard to see. You seem like a very intelligent person. The fact that you can do this overemployed thing, which I still don't fully fucking understand, is pretty impressive. But you seem like a pretty intelligent person. You're very detail-oriented in the way that you sent this information into the show. I don't have any doubt that you're going to progress and be just fine no matter what you do. A couple things that are kind of in the past, but as I'm looking back at what you sent that I kind of wonder about, the $28,000 car loan, depending on when you bought that, I am kind of curious, were those loans lower than the student loan interest rates, or did you get a car loan that was relatively recent where maybe you're in the high single digits? And my guess would be maybe the latter, because otherwise you might not have paid that off. But that would be one thing that maybe looking back, I would have taken into consideration. If you got a car loan at 2, 3, 4%, something like that, I probably would have carried that out and chipped away more at the student loans. But I don't know, because you didn't mention that in here about how much that car loan was. The credit cards, you had $24,000 in credit cards. I am almost certain that those interest rates were likely extremely high, much higher than the student loan interest rates, probably in the double digits or well into the double digits. So I think that's totally fine there that's gone. And then, as you mentioned, you've already paid off $75,000 of the student loan debt, and the $54,000 that we just talked about collectively is the amount remaining. Me personally, there's a couple different ways you can go with this, and as we get into the end of the email, this might make more sense. But given the fact that you've plowed away, as you mentioned, $5,000 to $7,000 a month on paying down student loans, I don't think that there's anything urgent that you need to. I don't think there's a reason it can. Put it this way. You don't have to do anything. You could coast and make your minimum payments and be fine. But the fact that if you were paying an extra $5,000 to $7,000 a month, you could pretty much have these things cleared in a year. If it were me personally, not due to the interest rates, but just due to the fact that I had 5 different loans outstanding and I've done such a great job of chipping away at those, I personally would probably just want to knock them out and be done. And for lack of a better phrase, I would probably tell myself, hey, you know what, Cash Flow King, suck it up. In 1 year, you're done. And think about all the extra money that you're going to have from a cash flow standpoint to do something else with. Mathematically speaking, from an arbitrage standpoint, is that the best answer? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But from a psychological standpoint, I think you've done a great job so far, but I feel like going full throttle for a year and just hitting the kill button and being done with those would bring you a great amount of emotional and psychological satisfaction. I know it would for me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that, excuse me, that is kind of probably where he is headed. I guess the one thing that I would say, and this goes back to kind of the income/debt part, is the only thing that really worries me is, where did the $24K in credit card debt come from? And, it may have been something that's been around for years when he wasn't making as much money, or he had some emergency spending or something, and that was outside of the norm, because that's something you definitely want to, stay away from and not have. I mean, it's like, I guess, you don't want to be paying off these student loans in lieu of making sure that you're not getting back into that credit card debt. That's kind of that's really the only thing about his debt that worries me, is where and why did that credit card debt happen. I know he doesn't have anything in here in his expenses, but maybe, I guess it goes one of two ways. Either with this second job, let's just use all the second job money or third job money or however many jobs he has to go ahead and pay off these student loans. But at the same time, I would hope that he's considering it eventually. There's a possibility he could get caught. I would think that he's working two jobs, or, he may not want to work two jobs anymore to make sure that, he can afford his lifestyle with one job, whichever job that is that he chose.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I guess we'll jump into it now so that the listener can get a better picture of this, because I agree with the whole credit card thing and, that being a concern. But at the same time, he does have a nice chunk of liquid savings, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But you're right, he does not provide any expense information. So I don't know, I guess I could crunch the numbers and try to figure out, okay, based on this income and standard withholdings and da-da-da-da. We didn't do that. This is this is kind of flying off the seat of our pants here a little bit. But that would be the only thing in terms of what that looks like. So assets, we'll come back to some of these, but brokerage account, $25,000, Roth IRA, $23,000, 401k, $105,000, and savings, and this is where I was trying to get to, $35,000. So he has $35,000 in cash. And so that tells me that he has obviously a surplus to be able to build that up, but to your point, is that coming exclusively from J2, J3, J whatever, whatever that second or third job might be, or not, right? Because you don't want to just plow away at the student loans, like you said, and then he gets cut, and all that savings was built from job number 2, and now he's back into credit card debt because he only has job number 1. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's depending on what he's spending, the $35K in savings, just looking at that number seems like a pretty healthy savings account. But, if he's spending 12 to 15K a month, then it's not
right
quite as healthy.
Yeah, I mean, so it really just depends on what that represents in terms of number of months, and we probably talked about this on the show before, but it's going to be different for everybody. I remember, and I might have mentioned this on previous shows, but I remember when I was studying for the CFP exam, there was something in the material, and it was a very, very wide range, somewhere between 3 months and 24 months, depending on 1 versus 2 income households, depending on salary and tenured positions versus commission-only positions, or positions that didn't have the same level of quote-unquote job security. And so there were a lot of different considerations there. I think 24 months for most people is just completely out of the question. I think 3 months of living expenses for most people is probably bare minimum. And I think for the vast majority of people, 6 months is likely the number for those that might be on a performance-based or commission-based type of position, especially if it's a one-income household. I know he said he's single, so I'm going to assume that there isn't anybody else whose income they are or he is relying on. It's just his income from the multiple jobs, presumably. Then you probably want to be on the 6 to 12 month side of things. I think 6 months is a good starting point. The fact that he does have some money in a brokerage account, some people would consider that, and we'll talk about this on another show with another guest who wrote in, that could almost be considered sort of a secondary type of quote unquote emergency fund. Because if I take the $35 and I put the $25,000 brokerage account with it, all of a sudden now we're at $60,000. So if he's spending $5,000 a month, for example, and I don't know what his expenses are, that's 12 months right there. And of course, the brokerage account could fluctuate. That could get cut in half tomorrow, hypothetically. So it could be fewer than 12 months. But I think you guys, as the listeners, you get the idea. So yeah, I mean, I first would want to start with, okay, what are your expenses, and figure out, how you feel about these positions in terms of, the income. And again, we're only using that 200,000 as a base, like you said. So that 20% bonus that is not guaranteed, maybe that's the amount that we kind of play with in terms of, do we use that if and when it comes in to chip away at the student loans? And there's a few different ways to do it, but I would first want to make sure, okay, what are my monthly expenses? And then the amount, that 35,000 in savings, how many months is that for me, depending on how much I'm spending? Figure that out. And then, where are you comfortable? Are you comfortable at 3 months? Are you comfortable at 6 months? Do you want 9 months? Try to get there. Are you comfortable incorporating the taxable brokerage account money with the liquid savings collectively together and view that in its entirety as your emergency fund? Or are you strictly looking at it only as cash? You know what I mean? Because people look at that differently. I think we did a show on that one time.
Right, yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, a lot of the thinking usually is, at least my way, is if it goes in an investment account, it's an investment to basically not be touched. But, I've changed my mind on that, and it's like, that's cash that's available to you. I mean, also, if push comes to shove, it looks like he's built up his 401k pretty well. Loans are available. Not that I'm saying you should do that, but, is that the greatest form of cash in the world? No. But it seems like, he's kind of gotten everything going onto the right track, in the right direction here, since he says it's kind of been the last few years where it sounds like he's really bulked it up. So my assumption would be that that's probably the second job. I'm guessing if he started doing it around COVID, that would be a few years that's kind of let him bulk this up a little bit. Some other things that he may want to consider, I guess if he does get that 20% bonus, then since he's filing single, you're basically screwed on a Roth IRA unless you do the backdoor Roth, like we've talked about, doing the conversion from a traditional, because according to this, he doesn't have a traditional IRA.
Right.
I would guess that he's probably, if he has 105K in his 401K and if he didn't have much in it 3 years ago, that he may already be maxing that out. Also, he could have a Roth 401k option if he wanted to go that direction. My opinion would be to not do that.
Agreed. For him, yeah.
Since, I doubt if your income's going to get any higher unless you get a fourth fucking job. But, really, in his case, it's almost a no-brainer to do it pre-tax, because I'm not trying to tell him that this is the most money he's ever going to make in his life, but realistically, if he goes back to one job, then in all likelihood he won't be making more money. Could he make the same money and only work one job? Probably, but yeah, it feels to me like he's done a good job of maximizing his income, at least if he doesn't mind doing a lot of work, or maybe he just doesn't do any work and can keep adding jobs. I don't know, but that's something I would definitely make sure that I'm doing is taking advantage of that 401k. And I believe I'm not a tax advisor, but I believe you only have one 401k that limit for the year. I don't know if you know that. You're a big CFP, all-knowing, but
I'm not
sure that you're not breaking the fucking rules on that.
I'm not all-knowing, but
Cash Flow Prince.
the elective deferral, for under age 50 is $23,000 for the year 2024, and I believe I would have to actually double check this, but I believe if you had multiple positions, I've really not come across too many people where this has happened, where this is a thing. Normally, well, it's a whole separate story, but I don't. Yeah, you want to be careful of that, because there's 415 limits, which have to do with employer money, which is, there's a total amount that can go into a 401k plan. The majority of that limit is usually not touched or used by the employer underneath the 415 limits, but technically they could put in typically way more than you can. That's why when you hear people talk about things like solo 401ks, if you have your own business and it's just you or you and a spouse, and they say how much more money you can put in, that's because you can put money in as both the employer and the employee. So the employee elective deferral is still the $23,000, but the employer is a fuck ton more. And so collectively, that's where they get these big ass numbers at a lot of these companies that do these. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but they do these self-directed accounts and whatnot. They are touting these much larger limits because of things like that. So I actually would need to go back and double check that on the 23,000 per position. You got me there. I want to say know that there's an elective limit underneath the 401k code, regardless of the number of plans. Like he could contribute, I believe, to multiple plans, but in the aggregate, I do not think he could do 23,000 per J1, J2, J3, J4. But I can double check that.
Right, I would agree with that. That's what makes sense to me, knowing what I know. But sometimes what makes sense isn't the right answer. But I that sounds correct, and I would believe that it is. So what you want to make sure you're doing, I would assume that he's doing this. If your company does provide a match, obviously the first, let's just say hypothetically he's making $100K and $100K. So what that would essentially be, let's just say 10% of his salary that he can defer for the year, right? If he gets the bonus, then it'll be a little bit less than that. But make sure that you are spreading it out to where you're getting the full company match if you do get a company match. Don't just fuck yourself going into one plan and miss out on the company match from the other plan if, they don't put anything in if you don't put anything in.
I actually just Googled this just for fun, and one of the first things that came up is this website called overemployed.com. This is awesome. Rule number one, and so don't take this as advice. Like I said, I can double check for more reputable sources, but while I'm on the computer, this is kind of fun. So rule number one universal employee contribution limit. And this person goes on to talk about how they called up Vanguard. Here's what they said, da-da-da-da-da. While you technically can contribute to multiple 401ks, the employee portion of the contribution limit applies across all 401ks, which is what I thought. In other words, your employee 401k contribution limit is universal and is the sum of all your employee contributions, or as this person puts, contritions. You got to believe everything you read on the internet, across multiple 401ks. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so yeah, I can double check that elsewhere. But at first Google search, which is kind of funny because we're talking about overemployed, I think
Hopefully Cash Flow Prince, just being a loyal subscriber to the podcast, he's probably already researched all this.
Probably has. I'm a little bit embarrassed, though, that I don't know for sure off the top of my head.
Oh, there you go. Boom, put you on the spot.
Yep. They're going to take my CFP marks away.
Yep, CFP my ass.
Yeah, that's right. All a bunch of phonies out here. That's funny. All right, so let's see. Where are we going with this? So, yeah, all right.
That was kind of my, just some general thoughts on the 401k side. Definitely if you're not maxing it out, I would like to think that you can, especially if you get that 20% bonus. Then obviously at that point I would probably start, continuing to beef up that brokerage account. If you're more comfortable and you kind of view that brokerage account of, bust the glass in case of emergency, and you aren't saving up to the 401k limit and you can't save up to it, maybe you only do up to the match in your 401ks, but honestly, if you're doing up to the match, you're probably going to be close to maxing out since you have two jobs. But, get some more money into that brokerage account and after-tax money that would be available to you.
Yeah, so the other thing that he goes on to say at the end of his email, and this might change your answer a little bit, I don't know, because you're probably going to not like this anyway, but he says, so those are my stats. A few years ago, I had virtually nothing in assets, and I'm pretty proud of how far I've come with everything. So ultimately, take the stats and take the show whichever way you see fit. Tear me apart if need be, but I would like some non-advice advice on if I am ready. Okay, here's the key. If I am ready with my financial picture to invest in non-retirement assets, i.e. turnkey rental and or real estate syndication. So before you go in and tell him, no, don't do that, let me just make a couple comments. Number one, for real estate syndication, and for those that are not familiar with that, we've done shows on syndications before. I believe I did a passive investing mini-series with ODOG, and then we did an update on some syndication stuff. So feel free to go back in the archives and check those out if you haven't. But most of the time, to invest in a real estate syndication, you will need to be considered an accredited investor. And there's different ways to get there. There's an income way to get there. There's a net worth way to get there. Technically, if you have certain securities licenses, you can get there. And there's some other ones for people that are not individuals in terms of how to be considered accredited. However, based on net worth, from what I can see, assuming we have virtually everything here, unfortunately, he does not qualify as accredited. However, based on income, he might. So if he makes at least $200,000 for the prior 2 years with the expectation that he will continue to make at least that much in the current year, then based on income, he could be considered accredited. So the reason I bring that up is a lot of these syndications will require him to be accredited in order to make an investment in a real estate syndication. That's number one. Number two, you can potentially get involved with the group that accepts investments from non-accredited investors. In my fairly limited experience as a passive real estate investor, here's what I will tell you, and this is just my observation and personal opinion. That is, if they are not requiring the investors to be accredited, you probably don't want to invest with them. There's one group in particular that comes to mind, and I won't slam them or throw them under the bus, and I've invested with them multiple times. Primarily, I invested with them when I was first starting out for a couple reasons. Number one, they took non-accredited investors, and at the time I was non-accredited. Number two, they had much lower minimum investment amounts, and at the time I had a lot less money. So it was easier for me to write a smaller check. So, those were two things that were kind of on their side as far as that goes. Knowing what I know now, investing with other groups, including other groups that I've invested with now, specifically those that require their investors to be accredited, I would probably try to steer clear of any group that is willing to take non-accredited investor funds. And I'm going to overly simplify this, but I will say it is a fucking pain in the ass, generally speaking, to deal with non-accredited investors, especially because you're typically going to have lower investment minimums, which means people are putting in less money, which means you're going to have a larger number of individual investors, and you're going to drive the fucking investor relations department of that operator, syndicator, sponsor, whatever, crazy. That's my opinion. And anybody that requires someone to be accredited, they're looking for larger dollar amounts, they're dealing with fewer investors, and quite frankly, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, those investors with larger portfolios that are dealing with larger dollar amounts typically are not going to be a pain in the ass to the sponsor. So I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes if you find a company that takes non-accredited and smaller investments, it's because they have to, not because they're good at what they do. And so just be careful of that. But technically based on income, he still could qualify. Now, does that mean he should do this? Again, we don't give advice, so that's up to him. But I personally, I don't think he's quite ready yet. I think he is like, there was an analogy that we used back in the day at my old firm in financial services where it's kind of like the plane is on the runway, and you can hear it's taxiing the runway, and then all of a sudden we're getting ready for takeoff, and you can feel when it goes from just a crawl to it starts going much faster, and you can feel, the engines and everything getting ready, and then, right before the takeoff, like you can feel the rumblings. I think that's where he is now. I don't think he's there yet. And so whether it's a turnkey single family rental or it's a real estate syndication, I think he might need another 1 to 2 years, and maybe he makes it a goal by the time before he's 40, for example, hypothetically, to get involved in something like that if he wants to. I don't think he's there yet. I think he's building a very healthy balance sheet. I just don't think it's quite where he needs to be able to find the opportunity and cut a check, and then with whatever he has left over, feel comfortable that his balance sheet is still, as we always used to jokingly say, based on Jamie Dimon's, I don't know if it was an article or press conference or whatever that time, a fortress-like balance sheet. You remember that?
Yeah, and I pretty much agree with what you're saying here. Just some random arbitrary numbers I came with, and it probably is on about that 2-year time frame that you mentioned. But I guess balance sheet wise or balance sheet goals that, maybe to consider before getting into that. Of course, you know how I feel about all that. Especially the syndication bullshit.
I know.
I don't care if they're accredited, non-accredited. Now, if you wanted to, buy a turnkey rental or something, I can understand that. But anyway, I don't know why. This is just kind of a round number in my head that I got. Assuming that we're maxing out the Roth, or not the Roth, the 401k. Then let's think if we can get once we get these student loans paid off. And, if we can keep our savings account at $35K or whatever, and maybe have our brokerage account build up to $100K. I don't know why that number popped in my head while you were talking. I was like, if he had $100K in this after-tax account plus what he has in his savings account, then I don't know. To me, mentally, I think that would make me more comfortable. Why? Does it make any real sense? Probably not. It's not like I crunch numbers on it or anything, but, you're going to be putting on more debt. And I think, like you said, if he can build off what he's built these last few years for a couple more years, my opinion is you don't need to deal with a fucking syndication to try to derail you on this good track that you're on. That's the only thing it's going to do for you. It's not going to give you a big enough return to fucking, I almost said something really bad there, but it's not going to give you a big enough return to do anything. Yeah, is it diversification? Sure, but do you need that where you're at right now? In my opinion, no. So that was just kind of some thoughts that I had as you were going through it. Obviously, you're more on the or know more and are more well versed in the real estate syndication side than I, but I am in agreement that I think if he continues his overemployment, and it sounds like it's really beefing up his balance sheet pretty quickly here, that just a couple more years even, and it could be really to the point where it's going to just almost snowball by itself then.
Yeah, and the only so I think if I'm him right now, if this were me and this were my balance sheet and my numbers, I'm probably out on the syndication, right? The turnkey rental thing, I could go either way with it. And here's the way I would see it, okay? If you are dead set on, I want to get into real estate, fuck you, Cash Flow King and Cube Crusher. I don't want to wait until I'm 40. I want to do this now. I'm tired of paying on these fucking student loans. I've been paying forever. Like, I want to get in the game, right? If that's what you're thinking, then here's what I would say. This would be, if it were me, the quickest way to get into it. You would have to be willing to, and I know Cube Crusher's not going to like this, and I can see why, and it's going to be going from liquid to illiquid or semi-liquid. But if you were willing to trade your brokerage account in, essentially, and take the $25,000 from your brokerage account and have that help you out towards a down payment and closing costs on your first turnkey rental. If you could just make your minimum payments on your student loans, if you don't care about wiping them out right now and you don't want to go full throttle with it, then fine, fuck it. Make the minimum payments on the student loans, take that extra cash that you were chipping away at the student loans with and bank it, right? Take the brokerage plus the additional surplus cash flows and probably, he said 5 to 7K a month. Let's just say 5K a month, okay? If he did that for 6 months, that's $30,000 plus the brokerage of $25,000. $25,000 is $55,000. Depending on where you want to invest, that can probably get you into your first turnkey rental property. There's no requirement to be accredited. You still have your other retirement assets in place. You're still maintaining the $35,000 in savings that you currently have. And that's your way to get in the game and dip your toe in. And then from there, you can do whatever you want. As long as your expectations are properly set, that it's not going to change your life overnight. You are going to be going from, fully liquid with the brokerage account. And if you trade that in, that money's now gone, right? You still have the student loans hanging over your head, and instead of knocking those out over the course of the year, if you take that $5,000 in my example for 6 months of $30K and squirrel that to the side and put that in the house in the form of a down payment and closing cost, that money's gone. So going back to what Cube said earlier about the credit card thing and the whole job too, if that goes away, you could be hopefully not in trouble, but all you're going to really have at that point is going to be your $35,000 of savings plus any, if you ever were under the income thresholds to make a direct contribution to a Roth IRA, access to Roth IRA contributions, and maybe if you're lucky, a 401k loan. Those are typically avenues you don't want to have to go down if shit hits the fan. But if you're comfortable with the jobs that you have, you feel like you're in a good place, you're just dying to get started, and you want to do something or something different, and you just want to get in the game, if it were me, that would be what I would be thinking about. I'm not saying you should do that or shouldn't do that, but if that's what you're going for, I think that's your fastest way there.
I mean, yeah, I would agree with that. That would be his fastest way there. Personally, I would absolutely not do that. But, like you said, I mean, if he's got an itch he really wants to scratch, then more power to him. But I, of course, as the listeners know, I have been shocked by the stock market, and then the stock market continues to shock me, and interest rates are shocking me, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the government will just print their way out of any issue. That seems to be the way to go with it. But it's you need to make sure that you're ready for if things go bad. Not when they go bad for you necessarily, but if they do. Like, if you lose one job, I'm sure you can still live. What happens if you lose both jobs and, you've bought into a turnkey rental recently and you're fucking stuck, type of deal.
Right.
So it's just, I know it's sexy and it's cool to say, oh, I own real estate or whatever, but if you want into real estate that bad, then, and I don't think he didn't send us what he's invested in, but I mean, fucking buy a REIT. I mean, it's owning real estate still. That's all a fucking syndication is.
No, I disagree with that. I go back to the McDonald's example. There's a difference between owning a McDonald's franchise and owning McDonald's stock, right? And I kind of see it that way. So you can do whatever he wants, but that's kind of what we think. So Cube says
if you're not quite ready to own a McDonald's, then owning McDonald's stock is a fine thing to do.
That's fair. I will agree with you there. And it's not a recommendation to buy McDonald's stock.
Hey, but that $5 meal going.
There's
the only meal I can afford out here.
There's no fucking
$50 dog and soda at Costco.
Yeah, no shit. That's still pretty good. That's still the best. You can eat tangent, obviously, but yeah, Costco still has the best food, best value. We still never got them we should get them as a sponsor of the show somehow. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So that's I guess that's our 2 cents on your situation. So overall, excellent job from getting from where you were to where you are. We're glad you found the show. We're glad that even before you found the show, you got on this personal finance journey. You might feel like you're late to the game and, you feel like you're just getting started and whatever, but I can assure you that there's a lot of people that would trade places with you financially because, I mean, you're really starting to bulk it up and you're on a good trajectory. I would be willing to guess that 10 years from now, if Cash Flow Rockefeller Prince looks back, he's going to he's going to be amazed at what he's accomplished in that time frame, especially if he continues on this trajectory. So I don't really think that there's a way for you to go wrong. The worst thing that could happen is obviously you go from liquid to illiquid, and what Cube said about the turnkey thing, and you lose both jobs, and like the world is coming to an end all of a sudden, and yeah, maybe you're fucked. I don't know, but as long as you're comfortable and you understand the risks, if you are gung-ho on real estate, I would start there. I probably would not do the syndication thing, but there's also nothing wrong with continuing to build assets like you are. And like Cube mentioned, if you decide you want to get into REITs, which are real estate investment trusts, that might also be an option for you. And there's different ways to do that, and there's different types of accounts to do that in. I don't know how far we want to go down the rabbit hole, but personally, I would not do that in a brokerage account, but that's me. That's the only other thing. I think he wants this. I think he wants the real estate exposure in a non-retirement way, if I'm reading between the lines.
No. Okay.
I mean, would you buy a REIT inside of a taxable brokerage account?
I mean, it's not the best place to own one, but you can buy it there. That's a large misunderstanding that's out there, because I don't know all of the ins and outs of it, and I think every REIT's a little bit different, but the way that their dividend pays, part of it is qualified, part of it's like actually return of premium, so that's not taxed. So yeah, it can, yeah, it's a little bit more in depth, but compared to some syndications that give you a K1 and all that shit, God, I can't wait to never deal with one of those again. But it's yeah, so it's just something that another thing that he could research if he really wanted to own real estate. Or do you outright own it? No. Do you own shares in a company? Yes. And is it as sexy to say, oh, I own shares in, what is it, Avalon Bay Communities? I don't know. I think they build multifamily housing or something. Well, yeah. Do you own fucking rental properties? Yeah, but you don't technically own them. You own part of the company that owns them. But
yeah. Well, the other thing, and he didn't,
something to research.
He did mention this in his email, but I don't know what his living situation is. So that's the other thing we didn't really talk about today, is house hacking, as some people like to call it. So I don't know if he's renting or if he owns, given the fact that he's single. I know one of the things that, I look back at, and I don't know if I've said this on the show before or not, but there was a time in my life where I was thinking about buying a duplex, and I was going to live in half and rent the other half. And at the time, based on the amount of stuff I had and the person I was with, we just decided, you know what, it's not going to make sense, and I didn't do it. And that is a big regret of mine. I think that, not that I want to self-manage, because I don't self-manage any of my stuff, but I think that, that would have been a good, fine place to start. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom duplex on each side. It was a side-by-side duplex. So I don't know what his situation is. Just because you're single doesn't mean necessarily you don't have any kids. I'm going to make the assumption that you don't, but maybe you do. I don't know. I don't know if you have pets or not, and what part of the country you're in or any of that stuff. But if you have an inclination to do any sort of self-management, and you are in a situation where you could potentially house hack, which you're going to buy a multi-unit, live in one, and rent out the others, that could be an avenue to go down. And if it were me personally, I would do that before even buying a turnkey, and certainly before syndications and anything else.
Yeah, that was something actually I hadn't thought of, but makes complete sense. I would venture to guess that he does not own a home. That wasn't listed in the debt, but I don't know. I would think he would list a mortgage as a debt. So, yeah, that's an interesting thing to say. I've actually seen some things since I've moved out here. There are, I don't know, I haven't researched it enough to try to figure out, but there are actually home builders that are building new construction here that essentially have, I forget what they call it, basically another home inside the home.
Like an ADU, a dwelling unit?
There's like a separate garage, a separate entrance, a separate kitchen, I mean, everything. And I'm guessing that's why they're doing it, because it's so fucking expensive out here that people, want to do the house hack and rent out part of their house. And, that, I don't know if that exists where you live or if it's something that would be possible, but, I think, and, that's kind of up to the individual. Do you want to have somebody else living with you? There's probably downsides. I'm guessing he works from home. This guy, Cash Flow Prince, works from home since he's working.
I don't know. He gets his shoes. He gets his shoes shined. I think he said once a week is one of his guilty pleasures or splurges. Did you hear that episode? Oh, yeah. See, you need to get caught up on the show. Yeah. So he wrote in, and I read the email on one of the shows. And he listened to the show on tipping culture, and yeah, he gets his shoe shined. I think he said once a week near his office. So yeah. So anyway, I think he does have an office that he physically goes to, at least for we'll call it J1, right? Job one. But who knows, right? So
yeah. So that would probably be realistic, the most realistic and the smartest way. If he was wanting to get into real estate that way, I would tell him that he would probably be able to do it within a year, to buy a house for himself. And
you can do it now. I mean, there's all kinds of programs out there. 3%, 5 or 3.5 now. I think it is 5% conventional. There's a whole host of options. So check everything out. But hopefully Cash Flow Prince, we've given you some things to think about. Hopefully the rest of the listeners found this interesting. If you are interested in sending in your numbers to the show and you'd like for Cube and or I have some other guests on from time to time, if you want us to kind of do a little review on your financial situation, on advice, just for entertainment and education, feel free to shoot an email over to the show at realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com, and we will correspond with you and get your numbers. So, and by the way, I leave it up to, at least up until this point, I haven't put anything together for this, but I kind of leave it up to the listeners to send us whatever they want. And I think that there's a couple reasons I do that. One, I don't want to make this like an official thing, right? But number two, it's like, I think that everyone is going to send what they feel is important to them, and they might leave out some stuff, and there might be some things that are unclear, but part of this is kind of thinking about, well, what if this, or if this, then that, and, you know, trying to read between the lines. And it's not, I mean, we want to obviously talk about your situation, but at the same time, we want this to be applicable across the board, maybe to other listeners. Maybe there's somebody else out there with a similar situation, and if we had every itty-bitty little detail about you, maybe it makes it almost too focused and too personalized. So anyway, if you want us to check out your numbers, send us what you think is important. realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. You know, there's going to be some stuff at a bare minimum that we need in order to have an intelligent podcast or conversation about it, but you can send whatever you want to send. So, all right. I think I'm going to wrap there. Thank you. Cube, any last thoughts on this one?
No, just looks like the Cash Flow Prince is doing pretty good, so, you know, keep at it, and that's all we can do, and the money will keep growing more than you ever imagined.
Yeah, that's true. And thank you for being premium.
Premium.
We appreciate it. And we will see everybody in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.